Hello, Ify. Good morning.
Okay.
How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thanksgiving. Sunday.
They chose period. I don't know if
Get this one on. Are we start?
is it very old?
What is my the
Very
man?
old, yeah.
The man 90.
90 old.
Before it dies, his leg good. God, these are in-laws. In-laws. Land, no, Germany, UK. They go.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. good morning. I welcome you to today's session. I need somebody to confirm that you can hear me.
Mario, I can hear you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. And thanks to our mentors, Ifi and Dara. We are so happy and glad to have them for today's session. And we look forward to having a very great time. So without wasting time, let's just go get right away into the sessions. I introduced Ifi and Dara on our Slack platform yesterday. I said Ifi is the chief of staff at Venture Garden Group, and Dara is the principal of corporate strategy at Venture Garden Group. So it's a privilege and a very great honor to have them here with us. So Ifi, thank you so much once again. I would hand over to you shortly, but I just want to send a notification on our Slack platform to ensure that we have just a few more people join us before we comment. And again, to remind us of what today's topic is meant to be, or what our focus for today is. So we are looking at the differences between data information and intelligence, sources of data, knowledge, and information. Sorry, let me mute this person. Okay. So we are looking at sources of data and information. So those are our focus. Those are our focus for today, and we hope that from the self-led study, which we started on Monday, that the participants will have questions for you and for Dara. So thank you once again. You have the floor now, Ify. Thank you so much.
Mario, hello everyone. Good morning. I hope you're having a good celebration, long weekend, whatever. I hope you're having a good weekend, though. So, like Mario said, we are hoping that this conversation will be a lot more interesting. Because the objective is not to do like a full classroom type session, is to really delve deep. Please, if you're not speaking right now, can you mute yourself?
So that's been taken care of. Sorry about that.
Us also coordinate all this. When you want to speak, just raise your hand so that it's easier for Mario can easily coordinate to identify who has a question. And if you don't want to speak up, you can even type the message, type it as a message into the chat room, either to Mario or to the general room, and then we can address those questions. The idea, like I said, is to be interactive, to have you ask questions that you probably have from reading for over a week. Have you also interrogate sourcing. A lot of the that a lot of things that you tend to discover when you are working in an environment like within any country, most countries within Africa, is that you realize that data is not the easiest thing to get. It's not it's not in our nature to data in a way that use it for driving intelligence and decision making. So a lot of the experience we have would speak to how we've been able to overcome this, or how we've been able to address this, or how we've been able to leverage our years of experience to enable us work in an environment like this. So like I said, let's make it interactive, ask questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question, right? You can ask anything that really disturbs you, anything you really feel like is not being touched on, so that you can get more information on it. And at the end of the day, everyone goes home, gets out of this session with clarity, and is able to work seamlessly moving forward. I think I'll introduce myself, and then I'll let Dara introduce himself. Then afterwards, we'll probably give a bit on our backgrounds and what we do. and how, how data and market intelligence has been relevant to what we do. So by way of introduction, my name is Ifeanyi Moye. Ife is easier for most people who find it difficult pronouncing my name or find it difficult to understand that a girl answers Ifeanyi. Yeah. So Ifeanyi Moye, call me Ife. I'm Chief of Staff at Venture Garden Group. Prior to being Chief of Staff, I was the head of the business analysis department. I'm a consultant, strategy consultant. I led the market intelligence team within VGG for about 2 years, 2015 through to 2016. So market intelligence has always been a subdivision within the business analyst team in VGG. Prior to joining VGG, I was working with a strategy consulting firm in Nigeria. Spent about 3 going on 4 years there. Background. Dara, over to you.
Thanks, Ife. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So my name is Dara Oshibo. Currently with the corporate strategy team at VGG. Prior to this role, I was the head of Garden Data, which is our data analytics platform team. And prior to that, I was actually in the Office of the Vice President of Nigeria. And there we were working on, I guess, social projects, the projects that most people now know as, Empower, cash transfer. But prior to that, most of my experience had been in the UK. So I'd worked in private equity, and there's a large component of that that has to do with research. I worked in IBM, and I worked in a few other kind of Fortune 500 companies, but most of that work was around finance, supply chain. A lot of supply chain work has to do with a lot of research. So, like if you said, please let's make the session interactive and ask any questions that you want to ask, because there are no stupid questions.
Okay, thanks, Dara. Just to get on topic, which is as Mario has explained, the focus of today's chat is to discuss how did he phrase it? Difference between data, information, intelligence, and then the sources of data, knowledge, and information. Okay, so like I earlier pointed out, one of the earlier roles I had in VGG was to lead market intelligence. And, one of the things you find out very quickly is that data is not an African thing. Let's be real. A lot of us just go through without necessarily taking note of, the data that, we interact with on a daily basis. Done more around data. Take, for example, the telecom companies, and now maybe a lot more guys in the payment space. But till today, data for you to pretty much understand the market environment that you are in when you're in an African country. A lot of foreign companies, when they want to enter into an African country, tend to have to pay a lot of money to guys who are locally around operations locally to do a lot of primary data collection in order to help them make informed decision on how to enter this market. A lot of businesses in Nigeria pretty much start based off of gut feeling, not to that market really looks like. Now, for a company like VGG, a lot of what we do is investment, right? So making a decision based off of gut feeling is good and great. That when you're able to back it up with data, you're able to project properly to ensure that you're putting your money where you can see evidence of growth, evidence of possibility of the return of that investment. Now, if you think about it deeply, there is another aspect to engaging with data that's also very important. The fact that data on its own is pretty useless, right? There is data and then there is information or there's insights you can get out of it, intelligence. The fact remains that on its own, if you have a string of data, there's no way to make head or tail of it. The fact that you're able to take that data and perform certain activities to analyze that data and use through that process, derive insight and intelligence from it, is what is of use to organizations, to any corporate. The question is, how do you go about that? What do you do? What are the steps that you can take, to derive, insight from data? I will try as much as possible, to speak to my own experience around that. Mine tends to tend towards the strategic objective or strategy design point of view. Dara has a load of experience around finance and other aspects of business, so he would also share from that end. But I would say that before we start going into the specifics of our experience around how we've interacted with data and been able to, take things from data into tangible insights that can be used for decision making, and how we explore the idea of intelligence gathering sometimes, which can either be very covert, or you can have general overt type stuff. I think it would be good to interact with the class to say, what have you learned so far from your reading, from your engagement with the materials sent to you? What have you been able to do with? What have you been able to learn? Experience. What have you been able to learn from all the reading you've done? If anyone is ready to share comments of what they were able to pick up, or what the questions they have, would be good to hear it now.
If you want to share, you can kindly unmute and just share.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, this is Dami
speaking. Someone is trying to speak, but you may need to speak up louder. I can't really hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
It's getting better, but you still need to speak up a lot louder.
Oh,
Hello.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You.
So my question has to do with my question has more to do with how do you go about aggregating data? Like, if for example you want to research how many people booked flights or something in 2019, this is not exactly data that you can find online mostly, because I checked the statistics of Bureau recently and their recent update was 2018. So how do you go about collecting this kind of data where you want to know, okay, how can you position yourself in the market for growth and stuff? How do you collect data that is not exactly in the market and you have to negotiate with another company?
Okay. Thank you for that. How to collect data that is not readily available. Any other person with question or insight from what they've been able to material so far?
Can you hear me?
Yes, hi Blessing, I can hear you.
Blessing, my name is Blessing, and something I can say, like what I learned about the difference between data information and intelligence is that data just raw facts that you collect. There's no meaning to it. You just go, you get it from your source. Why information is actually when you apply meaning to that data. You've applied meaning, and yes, you can derive something, you can derive context from that data that you've gotten. So that's what information is. And now intelligence is when you can use that particular information to make decisions. That's why I feel intelligence is like you use that particular information to make decisions, and you have different support tools, different softwares that you can use to make such decisions. Like you can use your Python, you can use your statistical analysis, you can use your R, and you can use your Power BI, like if I'm correct, and some other things like that. And you have different sources of where you can get your data from websites, and just going to companies you and get your data.
Okay, thanks, Blessing. If I heard you correctly, what you said was what you understand is data is, is when you can gather data. Information is some form of or analysis that you do on it, and intelligence is when you're making decision based off of the insight that has been gathered. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I think Nkechi has head.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so why reading, from what I could get from data information intelligence, especially when it comes to processing information and getting intelligence, we keep getting questions like I kept seeing things like the human element, and how the human element cannot be taken away from the intelligence process. So my question is, how does the human element, we as the human element, improve apart from having the technical skills to crunch the numbers and all of that? Is there a must do for anyone in market intelligence? Is there something you do habitually? Is it like you look at the trends? Is it like you study the market and all of that? What are the habitual must do for them? Because sometimes we hear that, okay, like Mr. Dara was talking about him working in IBM and all of that. It's as if most times it's persons out there that knows what happened in the UK and all of that. They are the ones that have more insight. Like they just come from there, they see what they are doing out there, and they're like, okay, let's come to Nigeria, and then boom, market has started and all of that. So my question is, the human element, how do we improve upon that apart from the technical skills? Thank you. Okay, I'm done.
Most of it. Thanks, Nkechi. Temitayo. Hi, Temitayo. Can you hear us? Okay, is that just me? It seems like Temitayo is breaking up really badly.
Temitayo, we can't hear you. Could you try and drop your question in the chat if we keep struggling to hear you?
Okay. Okay, so Temitayo, please type up your question and drop it in the chat room. I think we have another hand, Ashioma Mehdi. I hope I
Yes,
my question is, are there organizational standards for gathering intelligence, or is this subject to the...
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, can I go now? Hello.
Yes, hi, Ashioma, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, and when going through the materials on data intelligence, I found so many information about data storage, especially most of the data are stored using cloud like AWS, Microsoft Azure, and the rest. But the question I have is that since we're talking about sensitive data, how safe are those data stored? Because I remember the time that Facebook, all the data from Facebook were gotten by one of these organizations in the UK. so other Cambridge Analytica. So if that is the case, if we are going to work with sensitive data, how do we know of the security of the data when we're storing it in the cloud? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Ashima. We have another hand up. Koka Oladi Pupo. Go ahead and unmute yourself so that you can speak.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, so good morning. My questions are around intelligence and then data gathering. Okay, so I do a little bit of data analytics myself. So that's how I got into this group. I saw it on a friend's WhatsApp status. So presently in Nigeria, I don't know if you guys have found a way around it. Gathering data seems to be so difficult. You don't find it even where it's supposed to be found, like places like NBS and the information build. With it even being passed, you don't seem to have even basic data for something like the price of bread last 2 months. You understand, in your area. So it's really crazy. So if we are moving from getting data to providing actionable intelligence, how do we bridge the gap of even finding the right data to use? Because most of the data I would use, you understand, maybe working on my own stuff. Presently, I'm doing self-learning on Coursera, IBM. Almost all the data you find out there, even when you do self-learning courses, you go to Coursera, you do a course, go to EDX, you do a course. Most of the data you find there are not Nigeria-centric, they are not African-centric, they are just data you source from Europe, data you source from America, data you source from elsewhere. But so if we are moving forward, really, we are getting intelligence into our market. Where is the data we are using to provide it? How do we get that type of data that we can use? And do you guys have any structure for gathering that type of data present?
Awesome. Thanks for that. How do we get data that is very centric to the environment? So I think those are the questions we have right now. Thank you all for sharing your questions and your understanding from what you've learned so far. I think I will hand it over to Dara for a bit to speak through his perspective and his thoughts on this. Then I would also add mine as we go along. Thanks, Dara.
Thanks, Ife, and thank you guys for the questions. I think I was taking a note. I think 5 people asked questions, and I will come to those questions, but I'm going to do 2 things. The first is that I'm going to try and set a common understanding of data, information, and intelligence. Then I'm going to use kind of a case study that I think all of us can relate to. So I will probably use something like Google Maps, right? And let us go through that kind of data, information, and intelligence sequence, and then we'll use that to answer the question so that by the time we get to the questions, everyone's looking at it from the same perspective, and hopefully people can start to think of ways on even to improve the suggestions or recommendations that we give in this session, right? So that's the approach that I'm going to kind of take. So let's get the boring stuff out of the way. What is data? What is information? What is intelligence? For me, so data is the raw and individual facts, right? So if I say VGG is 9 years old, that's data. There's nothing I can do with that, but it's fact, or it's a truth, right? It's just there. It's the same thing saying I have 5,000 naira in my account. It's facts. It's rarely useful, but it's there. Now, what's information? Information to me is when you take different data in different forms or the same form and bring it together to answer everyday questions, right? So I use the example of the 5,000 naira in my account. if, let's say, I had a sponsor who gave me money every 20 days, and he says, how much is in your account today? I say 5,000. He says, okay, I'm going to give you 95,000 so that you always have 100,000 every 2 days. I've taken 2 bits of information, how much I have in my account, and let's say the amount the sponsor normally wants to make sure that there is in my account. So he wants to make sure there's 100K in my account, maybe every 2 weeks. You add those 2 pieces of information together, those 2 pieces of data together, you start to get information. Information, I believe, is always confused with intelligence. And when I see people talking about data research, I see them looking at information and confusing it in some cases either with data or confusing it with intelligence. Now, I'm going to go to intelligence, and I'll come back and we'll talk about that disparity between information and intelligence. Now, for me personally, what is intelligence? Intelligence is getting the combination of information, right? But for a purpose. And that purpose is that I should be able to, 1, tell a story. That story and narrative is actually very important. Secondly, that story should be able to inform decision, right? It should be able to inform decision. Now, it's important to understand that that decision maker doesn't need to know the background, doesn't need to know the data, he just needs to make a decision based on that information. Let me now talk about the Google Maps example, and maybe this will make sense and everybody will be able to follow. So I schooled in Lashere in Osun State, and I have a couple of relatives that live in Ekiti. For anyone that comes from Ekiti, Ekiti is like a very mountainous area, depending on where you are, depending on which area you are at. And in Lashere, I could actually see like my uncle's village in Ekiti just because it was on a mountain. Now, when I live in VI, so sometimes when it's time for me to go to Ekiti, like during Christmas, I have 2 options. I can go via Aja, go to Shagamu, then make my way to Osun State, and then go to Ekiti. And my parents also live in Ikeja, so sometimes I go to Ikeja, go via Ikeja, Ibadan, and go to Osun State. So I have 2 options. Those are Ikeja route, Aja Shagamu route. That's data. None of the 2 examples tell me which one is the better route for me to take. But that's just data, that is what it is. Then when I search online, it says actually, you know what? The Aja route is shorter. So maybe Aja route is 50 kilometers. And maybe the Ikeja Ibadan route is 100 kilometers. Now, taking those 2 bits of information, those 2 bits of data, I now have information. I now know that technically, all things being equal, it's actually shorter for me to go to Aja and get to Osun or Ekiti that way. Or I can go to Ikeja, Ogun State, go through Ibadan, and that would take slightly longer. So that's information. But here's where Google Maps really comes to life. Google Maps can say, okay, sure, your Aja route is shorter, but there is more traffic there. So it's actually going to take you maybe 3 hours going through Aja. But if you go to Ikeja, even though Ikeja is longer, it will take 2 hours. Guess what happens at that point? Because the normal use case is that I've gotten into my car. I want to go. Maybe there's a wedding, there's whatever it is. I want to make a decision there and then, right? I don't want to know about the traffic or anything. I just want to know which route should I take right now, right? Google Maps takes into condition whether it's raining, whether there's a road work, whether there's one way, whether there's whatever, and just says you have two options. This is the fastest route. You will get there in 3 hours. And I make a decision whether I want to take that route, take an alternative route, or I want to stay at home. Right? It doesn't burden me with going through the information and trying to connect the dots myself. It takes all of that data, all of that information, and just says, good afternoon, Dara, you have two options. Option A, option B, and for myself, I have option C, which is stay at home. Now, when a lot of people talk about doing data analysis, doing things like that, what they present to you is information. They start saying, oh, you can go to Ikeja, you can go to Aja, this one takes this long, this one takes, you're not giving me intelligence. When you give a report and you give insights, I want to make decisions. You need to take your intelligence and you need to pack it so that I am simply making a decision. A lot of times this happens at work, right? I'm speaking to the finance team, we're trying to make a decision, we're trying to negotiate, and then they start sending me this Excel sheet that has all the data points. And I had to explain to them, guys, this is fine, but I don't need this. There are two options. Are we going to agree to 100 Naira per student, or are we going to agree to 200 Naira per student? Yes or no? So I think that there's a disparity and there are different, data has its place, information has its place, intelligence has its place, but often I see that people mistake information for intelligence. And the real difference in intelligence for me is that you understand the possible, the possible decisions that a decision maker will have to make when that intelligence is put in front of them, right? Using Google again as an example, Google knows that you are trying to drive. And it says, okay, are you on a bike? Are you on public transport? Are you in a car? And it just gives you the right information to make a decision there and then. So I'm going to first stop here and just take a break, see if anyone has questions and if he has some additional comments to kind of make on what I've said.
Okay, thanks. Thank you so much, Dara. I think what I call it, that summary that tries to differentiate the three from each other it's super, super important. And I think a good way for me to add to this is to say that the activities, the research or data, the research activities you do to gather what I call it, fact. The research activity you do to gather facts is what results in you having, a boatload of data. The analysis of that data, the data points by adding multiple data points together, connecting multiple data points together, results in when you have a question, which is a decision to make, you have to combine a boatload of information to actually derive intelligence, because it's that intelligence that leads to the decision making, which is answering that question that you have. So gathering facts results in data. A boatload of analysis gives you information. Then when you've gathered information together, multiple information together, you can answer a specific question with that intelligence that you've created. So intelligence for us is a lot deeper than just creating facts. I don't know if anyone has specific questions or insights with regards to what Dara has spoken to before we go deep into answering the questions that had been previously asked. If you do, just raise your hand. That would, let's give like a 20 questions. Okay, seems like we are all pretty solid on the comments that Dara has made, and everyone seems to be on the same page. I think that, you know, when we talk about market intelligence, it's, you know, alluding to what Dara has said, which is that the reason why this topic was one of the first topics that needed to be addressed is that you have a situation where people struggle with market intelligence because they tend to stop at either the data or the insight stage. It's a problem because most times the people who benefit the most from market intelligence are executives. And the reason why they need this intelligence is to make quick decisions. If you give them information or data, what you've done is that you've transferred the responsibility of analyzing and coming up with, you know, recommendation or the action to take. You basically transferred it back to them. That means they're essentially doing your job. And that's why you have a lot of people struggle, you know, with, you know, performance within an organization when their job involves intelligence, you know, providing intelligence for decision making. The separation and the understanding of this very early is why, you know, we had this topic start from the very beginning. So we understand that, you know, when we start going deeper into this, we expect you to go past just giving data. We expect you to go past just giving, oh, these two data points, you know, this is the information we are seeing. We expect you to start to think deeper to say, what questions, you know, what questions do we have and how do we gather this information to answer those questions? And I think one of the key things we'll see as we go deeper into this conversation is that asking the right question is one of the most critical aspects to market intelligence. The question you ask, the why you ask, that why being, you know, air quotes, the why is what drives everything around intelligence. The right question determines, you know, everything you are doing. If you need to get into the habit of asking questions. You need to get into the habit of asking the right questions. And it's one of those things that will help you in this part or in this field as we go into it. Dara, I think you can then start with the questions that were asked previously. And I think Temitayo has also added her question, you know, she sent it privately to me, so I'll just read it out. She was having connectivity issues. Her question was, are there organizational standards for gathering intelligence, or is this subject to the individual's technical strength? Okay, so are there organizational standards for gathering intelligence, or is it subject to an individual's technical strength? So, Dara, I'll leave this to you. Start with the set. I'll jump in afterwards.
So, what was the name of the person that asked the question?
Temitayo.
Thank you.
Correct.
Thanks. So actually, just before, because this is meant to be an interactive session, just before I answer, so I have the questions here, and both Damilola and Deko asked questions around information gathering. Now, going back to my Google Maps example, the question I want to ask, sorry?
Just 1 second, Dara, so that you can add this to your list of questions. I think Damilola has his hands up,
Okay.
so that he can just ask before you go deeper.
No problem.
Thank you. Damilola, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So my question is this: when you're gathering data, you've gathered data, you have insights. Your intelligence is based on say some form of policy right now, and what you are trying to provide intelligence for is like a long-term vision, maybe a 3, 4, 5 year plan. How do you factor in possible policy changes in your intelligence reporting?
So if I hear you correctly, when the decision that needs to be, when the question is okay, Damilola, I'm going to repeat the question back to you. Just confirm if I'm understanding you correctly. What I understand you say, I understand your question to be is that when you are trying to answer a question that is a long-term plan, in other words, you are planning for something that is not in the current, it's in the future, 5 years down the line. How do you take advantage of the data or the information that you have today to actually project and, what's the word? predict the policy changes and other activities that may happen that may impact that plan. Is that correct?
Damlola, you're on mute, but I think that's the same question if you, I go.
Yeah, yes,
So
that's the question I was.
All right, cool.
Okay.
So, all right, you can go back to you.
Thanks. So, so Damlola's initial question and Dikwa's questions kind of asked around gathering data. And I go back to my Google Maps example. How does Google, so 2 days ago, I drove to our office on the mainland, and Google said, don't take that mainland bridge, it's closed. And during that journey, it then said, actually, you can take that mainland bridge now because it's open. For those of you that haven't done the journey, the government at 11, once it's past 11 a.m., they open it so that people can drive from the island back to the mainland. So I asked myself a question, and I'm asking you, everybody on this session, the question: number one, how did Google know that Third Mainland was closed? Right, because Google Maps, as far as I'm concerned, is almost in every country. So is it that they have one person per country sitting in their office just monitoring what is going on? And then secondly, how does it actually know that it takes, it takes me 52 minutes to go from my house to the office in Ikeja, right? And how does it know if there's traffic or not? Because it's doing that in real time. But how are they capturing that data? Let's just think of Nigeria alone. Does anybody have an idea how Google is actually capturing that data at the moment? Again, guys, this is meant to be an interactive session, so I would love to get some response, whether it's in the chat or people just unmuting and just answering and giving their own opinion on how we think Google captures that data. Don't be shy, guys. There's no wrong answer.
Okay. This is Ashima Mehdi once again.
Hi, Ashima. Go ahead, please.
From the, I know because for Google Maps, so I add reviews to places. I write about things ongoing on Google Maps. So they gather information from people like us who are constantly editing Google Map. I feel there's one channel which they get all the information.
Thanks, Ashima. I think that makes sense. So I too sometimes, if you look at my own Google profile, you see that once or twice, maybe I check into somewhere and maybe I leave a review for certain places. So you have, I guess, let me use the word voluntary information. So there's voluntary information that I, as a Google user, and you as a Google user, puts out there, and Google uses that to inform other people, to provide data points. So if I go to, I don't know, Ghana High, I leave 3 stars, data points, right? But by the time all of us, all 20 something of us here, 29 of us go to Ghana High and leave 3 or 5 stars, it provides information for the next person to say, I don't know about this Ghana High. Then when we start leaving comments, someone's like, the Amala gave me running stomach. Then people are like, I don't want to go there and eat Amala anymore. But going back to the Google example, so a lot of people are saying, so a lot of comments in, saying, someone says, Ajibola says, maybe satellite imaging, okay. But I don't work at NASA, so not satellite work. But can the satellites that look at Nigerian traffic be looking at all the traffic across the world at the same time? So maybe there's a second way or supplementary way they collect the data. And data collection is not just about one method. So we already have the voluntary ones that you and I give up. So maybe there is then, satellite information that they use. Then, Yemi also says, Google also uses data of its users. So maybe the information that we don't voluntarily give per se, but Google uses it. Ibrahim says, I believe they make use of the GPS on their phones to collect data movements. Yeah. So in my mind, that's probably more correct. So if I use a Google service today, and it would ask you at the start, once you install it, do you want to allow location? All of us, we just click yes for everything. They're like, do you want to sell your parents? They're like, yes, 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 right? So probably if that whole saying yes, we've allowed them to maybe latently check the information. So when I'm driving now, and I'm driving to Osun State, and Google says that he has been standing still for 5 minutes. Then it checks maybe the other 30 people who are also driving there. It's like they're all standing still. There's most likely a traffic here. So all of a sudden, you that are about to leave will tell you, I have an update. There is a 15-minute delay on the way to Osun State. So Google potentially uses 3 different data points to be able to give information. And obviously, they stitch that all together with that nice AI algorithm. Let's use all those big words that we like to use: AI, machine learning, deep learning, to create that intelligence even on the road. So they didn't just stop at providing me the intelligence when I was leaving my house, but even on the road, they constantly keep giving me that intelligence. So coming back to the questions that were initially asked now.
Can I add something there?
Sure, if you go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, thanks Dara for that. I think I also want to add like another example. It's called an app called Waze.
Yeah, that's a good example. Go ahead if you.
Mostly. So I'll give, so typically what you see is that if a driver is on the road and is going through, the US, let's consider the fact that, racism is a big deal, police brutality and police issues is a big deal in the US. So if you're driving around, take for example, a street in Miami, and you, at a point, you see a police vehicle at a particular point, you can indicate that, oh, I have seen a police car here, right? Now, keep in mind that because you have a network of multiple people providing multiple information at the same time, what you have is individuals volunteering information to a platform that then services other people on that network. So just take take some time, look at the company called Waze and how they've basically similar to Google Maps, only this time you are volunteering information about what you see on the road as you go. Oh, there's a traffic here. Oh, there's an accident there. You can actually volunteer that information. And by giving that information, what you've done is that everyone else connected to that network has a similar information and then knows the impact, and they're able to make that decision, whether or not to pass that same route that you've taken, depending on whether, I don't know, if they don't have driver's license, they can choose not to. So essentially, what I'm coming to is that when it comes to data gathering, there are 2 types of ways. You either have primary data collection or you have secondary. In a primary data collection scenario, people actually either volunteer that information, or in the case of Google, they are able to ping and collect that information. So it's either a push or a pull scenario. You're either pushing data into the central source of the storage or central holder of the data, or that central holder is pulling data from you. So that is a very, very great way to describe the context of data collection. Primary scenario where there's a push or a pull, data is being provided into a central location by the users, the actual people experiencing that, or by the actual process that is experiencing or going through that activity. Someone asked what is the name of the app. Is Waze, W-A-Z-E, I think is Z-E. Yeah, Waze. Then secondary information data collection is where you're having scenarios like how I can go search for data on a which example can I use now? Off the top of my head, I can't think of a secondary provider. A journal, a book, someone else who has already collected that data, like an online portal. Say for example, MBS, for example, can be your source of data. Those kind of things. A secondary source of data is where you are a third party. You can go meet to collect that data. So I think in the case of we always have to be very conscious of, the fact that data can be sourced from multiple places before we even start speaking to, the information that you can gather. So to verify and keep, validating that information, Google can take 3 or 4 scenarios, either the phone of one provider, multiple providers, use satellite imaging, add artificial intelligence and all of the above, and they've collected, that information. If you want to really think about it, think about how, for example, Google Maps was able to first off map the roads. How did they do that? Obviously, there had to be some form of mechanism where they had to go through the road to even understand that, oh, this place, the road curves like this and then it bends like that. That is something that cannot be avoided. So, Dara, back to you.
Thanks, Ify, for obviously taking the example and linking it back. So if you talk about primary and secondary data, and yes, just using, I love using Google as an example because Google does so much and there's a lot to learn. Some of you who have used Google Maps, maybe on a desktop, there's this street view. Typically, when I was applying for jobs in the UK, and I had an interview date, I would go on Google, type in the address, then I'll go on Street View. So I know the exact door to go to, because there's nothing worse than getting there and getting there late, maybe because you went to the wrong street or whatever. Now, again, how does Google have a video and photo of the building? They had to do primary data collection. So they set up cars that had cameras and they went there and took that information by themselves. After a while, when they had a certain amount of data, they kind of started opening up, then I remember when they first came to Nigeria to do it, they actually had people with backpacks, which the cameras were on, and they just pay people to go and walk around, and the cameras will be taking the pictures and go to maybe my parents' house on Google Maps, and I can see the front gates. But let me come back to the question that was initially asked. Asked the question, how gave an example, and he said, okay, 2018 might be available, 2019 is not available. And I think this is a scenario that you're going to see a lot. But what's important here is, so let's break it down into a problem statement. So Damilola is trying to predict 2019 flight data, but only has 2018 information from NBS. Now, there are probably different reasons why he wanted information. He probably wanted 19 information, maybe to predict the growth of the air industry, or maybe he wants to start up a new business. Maybe he wants to sell something to airline passengers. So typically what he can do is use 2018 data. There are other macroeconomic data points that can be used to assess how much the industry, or let's say Nigeria, or the travel industry has grown since 2018 and 2019. So let me give an example. If there were 100,000 flights in 2018, and between 2018 and 2019, Nigeria grew by 10%. You can do one rough math and say, okay, if Nigeria grew by 10%, that means aviation grew by 10%. So 100,000 flights times 10, we now have 110,000 flights. That's an estimation. Or you can say, okay, how much did the airline industry or the air travel industry grow, right? If you can use that, and that would probably be more accurate than saying Nigeria grew by 10%. That's number one. Number two, you can then say, okay, what has been the historic growth of the airline industry maybe for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? And you can use that and say, okay, if every year it's grown by 20%, I'm going to assume that between 2018, which is the data I have from NBS, and 2019, it also grew by 20%. They are what we call, you can use, you can make estimations based on data. The concept of you having the complete data sets to make your analysis is really going to happen, right? And that is something that you have to be able to, you have to be comfortable with making analysis where the data set is incomplete. However, you clearly need to state your assumptions on how you bridge that lack of data and your what data points you can look at the rate of accurate. So I mean, let's even use 2020 as an example. If you use 2019's data to predict this analogy and this example when you're doing data analysis is to be able to get enough information so that you can put context to your analysis, right? In this case, there's COVID. So, and from COVID, you know that there are 0 flights. So you can use that for analysis to say, okay, well, if the industry typically grow at this percentage, maybe grow at 12% a year, you can say that was 1% a month. And if you had 4 months where there was no travel, you can probably remove 4%. Again, these are just several ways to be able to plug in gaps. When you have gaps in your data, these are several ways to overcome that hurdle. So I hope for Damilola, that gives you an idea there. I think Nkechi asked a question. Sorry?
Can I add to that before you?
Sure, go ahead.
So I also, one of the things I also drew from the question that was asked, I think that was by, was Damilola, and the other person who asked was, I'm trying to find the person's, Oladipo Koka. Let me just say Koka because the name is, sorry, I'm not very good.
Dipo.
Yeah, Dipo.
Koka, ask the question.
Also, the fact that there is, you know, the, what I call it, frustration in knowing who actually gathers that information. You know, Africa generally not being data driven right now, and yes, it's an evolution, and the fact that because data is not static, data is, you know, data is always evolving. It becomes very difficult to use, you know, old data with certain level of accuracy. For example, if you are doing, you know, research in, you know, we are doing some form of research or a paper, they'll tell you not to use sites, you know, is older than 3 years, for example, without, you know, without any concrete reason. I think that there are companies today, you know, that make it a part of their responsibility to collect primary data in these sectors that you speak of. And it's always important to try and find those people. So I'll give you an example, the airline data information you asked for specifically. We have a business within VGG, for example, that does airline, that is collects that. Question is it public? Is it public information? Is it information that multiple stakeholders within government, you know, share? And so, and hence make it, you know, public, like MBS is supposed to have that data, use it for analysis of the sector. It's not as widespread as you would want it, but there are companies that, that based off of their activities, their business activities, collect that primary data, try and see how to connect with those entities and how to negotiate access to that kind of data. Because those activities, there's always someone who, if, you know, the sector is, or if the industry you're looking at has some more forward thinkers, when you have forward thinkers, you would have people who are collecting that data because it helps in decision making. There is no way can at this point run away from the fact that a lot of the data that you may need to gather for different industries within, Nigeria, within several African countries, you have to collect using primary data collection techniques like interviews, like actually going there. You have something. I'm trying to remember a scenario. There was a scenario where I remember some research activity that I had asked someone to go gather data on something, and the person was confused because it actually required them going to go and sit down in a particular shop and actually count from morning till evening the number of people that walked into that shop. But the fact is, when you think about the environment we are in today, there is no other way for you to collect accurate information without actually going through that stress of collecting that by yourself. Primary data collection cannot be overemphasized. Now, are there ways that this can, happen seamlessly? Yes. The more you build out a network of people who are deliberately contributing data to a network, to a central holder, or someone who's consolidating that data, the more it will get easier to disseminate more accurate information in real time. So take, for example, if you say you want to know the price of bread in every single street in Nigeria, it is possible if there is someone on every single street who can collect that information every single day and push that data to somewhere central. That's why for me, Waze is one of the most, innovative applications. And someone mentioned that it's owned by Google. They were bought by Google because it was a strategic move. The speed at which that entity, that company grew was based off of the fact that they were not giving you static information. It was being collected continuously, and that was in 2013. I'm sure that part of it has also influenced, how Google has evolved its own maps, because the fact is, data does not remain static. If you have someone, or if you build a network where people are continuously collecting information, it means that at every given time, you will then have real-time information. So I would say that there is a lot of work that needs to be done around building structures around, Nigeria and different countries, across different industries, across different sectors, around how to collect primary data for each sector and in real time, such that it's easy to make it available to those who are using that information to make decisions, right? So basically what I'm saying in response to your question, there are people who collect that information. There are usually people who collect information on different sectors. They may not be collecting the information you want at that time, but the fact remains that primary data collection is one of the best means in which you can actually source for data on your, for any form of research that you're trying to do. Is either you connect to the person who is collecting that primary data, or you find that person and then connect to that person, or you collect it yourself. Essentially, it is important that we start to think broader than just finding that person. And if there's a way we can create a cost-effective mechanism for primary data collection that would be helpful in the environment that we are in. So yeah, just a thought from my end. All right, Dara, back to you.
Thanks, Ify. I think that makes sense. I think that in that Google example, someone mentioned the GPS, people tracking from the community. Waze was a community. Google saw that community acquired it. Now, everyone, and this is just food for thought, as you are all going
So is it just me, Dara? Are you? Is everyone else hearing Dara clearly?
Somebody else is the one putting it out there for you. So as you grow, data. Sorry, I think I lost Ify.
So Dara, you're breaking up badly. You're not very clear. Do you mind what you just said? When you just started speaking, it's not been clear since you started.
Hi guys, can you hear me now?
It's better.
Yeah, sorry.
Hi guys, can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry, I had to
switch over. Okay.
Switch over. Okay.
So
what I was saying is that as you grow in this journey of data gathering, market intelligence, the data that you are finding now has been put out by someone. And as you grow, you need to remember that as you build a community, just like Google did, or just like Waze did, and Google is doing, you also need to get to that point where you are also a contributor to the general data pool that people can access to. It's important. Someone put information out there, you got access to it. Over time, you need to get to the point where you are putting information out so that other people can access as well. So let me just go back to the questions because I know that we are, I've only answered one question. So Nkechi asked a question around the human element and how do we improve the human element of data collection? And she said, is it just by looking at trends? I think that to get your work from simple data and information to intelligence, you need to understand, there needs to be an understanding of the market or subsector in which that data is being collected and is being, utilized, right? You wouldn't want a doctor that doesn't know, that didn't study in med school to cut you up, right? You want someone who is actually informed and understands about that so that when he gives you a recommendation, you can adopt that recommendation. It's very similar. Number one, if, let me use banking as an example. If you don't understand how a bank works, you will never be able to write intelligence for a decision maker within a bank because you simply just don't know how it works. It's the same thing. You cannot give intelligence to a pilot in a plane if you don't understand air travel and a plane, right? So there needs to be some, I'm not asking you to go and be, the head of the pilot, but at least you need to spend some time gathering some information and some know-how about how that industry works, right? Then number two, I think that when you are sourcing for information, there are several ways to source for information that also benefits, the human element. And what do I mean? A lot of times, so, VGG, we're in a fintech space, and if you are now in corporate strategy, a lot of times our job is to look at the future and try and make sure that we are well positioned for the future. So how do I do that? A lot of times people say, oh, but the bank's this, the bank that. The banks are going to, swallow up fintechs, etc. We actually spend time reading the banks are publicly traded companies. So we spend a lot of time reading the financial statements of those banks. The financial statements tells us one thing. It tells us where are they making money, where did they improve from last year, and where are they investing money, right? Those places where they're investing money is most likely the places that they want to grow in the future. So we take that information plus every product release, right? Every information that they release. I probably spend the equivalent of maybe 3 hours a week looking through LinkedIn, looking at positions banks are hiring for, because those positions tell me where they are trying to go to, right? These are ways we build up the human element so that when I go back to that financial report or when I look at that new post or new comments that the CEO makes, there is enough context. I understand how the banking system works in terms of how they make money. I look at the hiring, so I know the teams that they're trying to build out. I speak to the banks directly to say, hey, how is this going? What are you guys thinking? What are you trying to do around there? We speak to their innovation teams, right? And we scrutinize every single report that they bring out. Now, that is how we build the human element, so that when we go to the organization, VGG, and we go to 200 plus people and you say, this is what we need to do this is what we need to start doing now, so that in the next 3 years, when the bank releases this, we are on par or very close to the bank. That human element is a very important part, but it's something that you have to build over time, and it requires you understanding the base knowledge of the sector that you are trying to give information for. Again, you cannot give intelligence to a pilot when you don't know what the pilot does. So I'm gonna, again, I don't know if you have any questions or comments to add to that, but I hope that kind of clarifies that human element bit. You have to spend the time to build that knowledge and build the human element. The technical capabilities will come in, but I don't think technical capabilities, in my opinion, probably counts for maybe 10 or 15%. Your knowledge in that sector counts for a lot more.
Thanks, Dara. Yes, I would love to speak to that. And I know when Dara says that, it feels like, oh my God, if I'm doing market intelligence and I'm cutting across different sectors, does that mean I have to be an expert in every field? Not necessarily, right? When we think about building ourselves up and doing quick research to understand the sector, it always seems like, oh, you have to understand fully everything. There is also something in the, when you're doing when you're doing intelligence gathering, market intelligence, or analysis as a whole, that there's a role called a subject matter expert. When you are unable to fully, immerse yourself into a sector, your best bet is to find an SME, a subject matter expert. If you look at, news outlets, you notice that whenever they want to discuss a topic, they always bring in certain key people to come discuss it along with them. They will have questions, they will have data. In some cases, they will have information, but they cannot derive intelligence from it without someone. Then they throw the information they've been able to gather at them, and those people help them put together all that data and information and tell them what this means in relation to the sector. So where you are unable to be an expert in every field, always identify your subject matter expert that you can go to say, this is the data I've gathered so far, this is the information I have, how can you guide me regards the intelligence that would be the result in this your sector. You may be able to put forward, oh, this is the question, or more importantly, it's always good to have the question you're trying to answer. This is to find out, so tell me what this means. And you will always have people who would, who have spent time in those sectors that would help you, get a lot of, whatever data and information you've been able to gather. Someone wrote in the chat room, speaking to, the human factor in the whole context of data, insights, and information and intelligence. And, they mentioned, two people mentioned, you guys are still at the data collection phase where you speak of the human aspect of that. And you say, someone said that when you're looking at collecting data is supposed to be unarguably factual. Using certain methods of data collection, such as questionnaires, which is basically surveys, tends to lead to non-factual biased data. How do you overcome such issues in data gathering process? That's a very brilliant question. You see, whenever you have research, research that is going on, there is something that is called margin of error, right? Anytime you are doing research, your research, the total number of respondents, or your test sample, your sample size needs to be sizable enough such that you are able to identify the common the most common data, the most common facts that are given, and then identify the ones that are outside, that common thread as the ones that are outside, your what's the word called? Dara, statistics. I saw cat marks. Dara, what's that line? Your English. You're muted. You're muted. Mm. Okay, sorry, my brain is not trying to remember a particular word. It happens all the time. But typically, when you have a sample size, let's say you want to research what is the average kilowatt usage of energy in Lagos, household usage. Your first objective is to get how many people live in Lagos? Let's say there are about 5 million. You need a sizable sample size, about 1% of that population. How do I get 1% of that population? Now I need them to answer the question as simple and straightforward as possible. And your question, the way you phrase your question matters. The fact still remains, like you said, some people will give you some false information or may not want to volunteer information. Someone spoke to that as well. That's as Asioma mentioned, that some people actually do not want to volunteer that information. And that's true. That is why research as a whole is a field of study. There's a lot of work that goes into crafting the question. There's a lot of work that goes into determining how you approach people to ask those questions, because some people may be touchy about certain information. And sometimes the way you put those questions forward to them may not be a survey, a document and says, okay, write out your answers. It may just be an interaction, conversation, right? So the mechanism, your approach to, collecting that information, to eliciting that information also matters. When you speak to, when you talk about the kind of questions you ask, so the kind of questions matter, the way you approach it matters. And I think one thing you also need to take into consideration is what is the value or the benefit to that person for giving that information. The fact is, human beings are human. Incentive can either be a positive or a negative, incentive. That means maybe you get something for giving that information, or maybe you don't get something as a result of not giving that information, or you get a negative result for not giving that information. The truth is, the concept of designing research and data collection is an actual study. You have to be very deliberate around what questions you have to ask, and ensuring those questions actually, give you your insights. The way you approach the people to collect that information, and then what incentive may be there if it is required for those people to actually give that information. So I do agree with you that sometimes it is very, very difficult to collect information, but by the time you've done those things, there is also still going to be a margin of error, which is why your sample size needs to be large enough to ensure that you can actually see a trend, where everyone who falls outside that trend is outside the norm, and you average it out. There's a mean structure that you use in statistics to figure out what is the normal, what is the reasonable normal, and then everyone else is outside the curve. I hope that helps answer the questions that were sent in by Asioma and Omoyemi. If that does not help, please add extra, insights or extra questions or comments in the chat room with regards to your own specific examples. But I think that I hope that in this process, I've been able to answer Asioma's question, because his was very, very detailed. He had an actual study, and he found it difficult getting information from people. And I think it's the design before you go into the act that matters. You may not be able to get this information that you require so much from a secondary source, because that really is dependent on if technology deployed to collect that information. If they do not have, you're going to run into the same problem. So I would say the design of your research and data collection matters a lot when you're doing primary data collection. With the companies, all right, go ahead, Dara.
Yeah, hi, Ify, thanks for that. I think you are looking at that distribution curve when you're talking about statistics.
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to put some things, there's some very valid comments that everyone's making, such as, hey, I don't get information from SMEs. Large corporates might be able to do this. SMEs say they're not cooperative. But earlier in the session, I made a comment. How many of us here in this forum today have actually put information out for other people to use? So you're struggling with an issue that you are doing exactly the same thing as the SME we are complaining about that is not giving you information. Yeah, and you can see how the cycle just keeps going, right? So that's one. Two, when you go to larger firms, typically understand the value of research and development. So when you are asking for certain information, you need to understand that larger firms have a better structure to deal with data, right? You have committees, you have managers, there's a better way that the information is recorded and flows. SMEs, not so. SMEs are trying to stay alive. Big organizations are geared to optimize for certain things, reporting, etc. Also, when you approach SME, are you giving them a reason and or justification as to why you want that data and how that data you're collecting is going to benefit them, right? This is not Zikoko. You can't just stop me on the road and ask me, what's the price of bread? Why should I answer you? I think my time is important. So why should I spend the 30 seconds to stop and answer your question? What do I get in return? So I think that as you engage with people, just don't take it away from I want data perspective. You are dealing with humans. Wherever you go, whether it's an organization, public sector, it's SME, it's a security man, you are dealing with a human being. So you have to think ahead of time and ensure that there is value exchange. You're right. There's value exchange for the people that you want them to give you your information. So for most people, for SMEs, you can say, hey, I'm collecting this data for this reason, all right? And maybe I'm collecting the data on how much you pay the local government or local LCDA charges, agents, and SME owners because I want to use this information to lobby Lagos State Assembly to cut down the fees. If you position that to a small SME and agent in the corner, they will give you the information. But if you just roll up and be like, okay, how much are these people charging you? Most likely will not. Because he doesn't even know why you're asking that information. Right. Then to the question, if you mentioned something about sample size, and I see this a lot, and I remember this. So first things first, as you know, data nerds, as I will call ourselves, you have to be able to understand what you are looking at, and you have to be able to verify what you are looking at. Understand and verify. Last year, I was looking for information around maybe northern spending patterns in the northern states. And I saw this research from a very reputable local company in Nigeria. And it showed me some trends. And I already write it down. I put it in my report. Then I read the entirety of the report, and I was like, these trends don't add up with what I know, my knowledge of the sector. So I then went to go and read, and most researchers will put the plan and the methodology they use for the research. I went in there and realized that this data that I was so proudly copying and pasting into my report was based on a survey of 100 people. You cannot take 100 people, right, to represent essentially half of Nigeria, right, to represent 90 million people, and then tell me that this is a strong report. It's not possible, right? It's just, there's no way it will be fully reflective of the end. That's the equivalent of me going into VGG, asking half of VGG a question and saying, this response of VGG represents the entire northern Nigeria. It's not possible. So you have to be able to question it and to realize if the sample size is big enough, right? Can 100 people speak for a population of 180? Probably not.
And also the sample spread. Sample
yes.
size and the sample spread.
Thank you. So in those 100 people, they only 8 female respondents responded. So there's no way I can take 8 women and say that represents the entirety of Nigeria. So we just need to, and again, this comes over time with practice, with deeper knowledge in data and marketing research. We realize that we need to be able to question the data that is put in front of you and decide whether it is valid enough for your use case, right? And again, that's like like an overlap between the technical human element and just the industry knowledge. If my industry knowledge wasn't good enough, I wouldn't have picked up on it initially to even start questioning the data, right? So just FYI, I've done statistics, but I hate it and I still struggle with it. But it's a cross to bear. That's what it is. Some people love it. I'm not part of those people that love it. Okay, so I think that Ashima asked a question around data storage, AWS, Azure, and the safety of data in the cloud. I think this table you want to shake, I don't think you should shake it. But here's my opinion. I guess that I've been alive long enough to see us go from floppy disk, both the small one and the big one, for those of who know what a floppy disk is, to CDs, mini CDs, and now hard drives and cloud computing. And every technology has its flaw. Now, in terms of data safety, data protection, I think that you are seeing, one, companies being more and more intentional about securing data. But two, you need to understand that most of the data points that are being collected for a reason. Most organizations, the big tech companies, are collecting these data points because they want to use it to create products that solve problems in people's lives. So there is a thin line between collecting the data, storing it and keeping it safe, and making that data accessible so that people can access it across the world to innovate and solve problems. Getting those two things to work, those two things are actually in conflict with each other. The safest way to make anything safe is simply to lock it in where no one can touch it. When I do that, then it's ultimately safe. But then I can't use that data to create innovation and solve problems around the world. So you are seeing companies struggle with that, and what we've seen in response is, governments come up with policies around data protection. Nigeria has NDPR. There's the right in the UK to be forgotten, so that if someone posts false information, online about you, you can request for that to be taken down. But I think that this is a constant evolution, and I think that the tech companies are doing the best that they can to make the data secure, but they also want to make the data accessible so that people can use that to create problems and create innovation that solves problems in our lives. If you do have a comment.
I think speaking to that, the honest truth is that at the end of the day, like you said, people will do the best that they can to secure data. I think that even in Nigeria, I strongly believe that we've not even gotten to that stage where we need to worry about the security of their own information, their own data and their own information, and that's fine. But when we think of market and environmental data and just data points around people and behavioral patterns and all that, at this point we don't even have enough of it to worry about the security of it right now, and we are leveraging structures that have been there for decades, and whatever it is we can think of, they probably already have thought of it. Right now, a lot of the efforts that we have is geared towards how do we even create the structures to collect data in a way and a manner that is cost effective, is efficient, and it ensures that we have real-time data as real-time as possible. But at least we have up-to-date information across various sectors and across various industries and stakeholders. So I feel like that concern, while valid, is more geared towards organizational information security than it is about when we think around market information and the availability of enough information data to help other people assess the market. So that's just my thinking on that. I can see someone's question here around data infringement in a country like Nigeria, where such laws aren't rigidly placed. So I do think that Nigeria does have data protection laws. Let's not put us down that low. We do have them. The problem has always been enforcement. First off, how do you police it? How do you enforce it? So it's very easy to create laws and policies. I told a friend of mine was looking at how to institute a structure recently, and I told them that the best people should focus more on positive incentives than negative. Why? Because it's always very difficult to implement negative incentives or punishments. It's always very difficult because that transfers responsibility on you to police and ensure that you identify where breaches happen. The fact is, it is very difficult to establish or put together the structures that would identify, these and validate these scenarios where there's plagiarization or misuse. And because of that, it's very difficult to police and met out punishment. How many people today have actually reported to the entity in charge, which I think is NITDA, of any form of misuse or plagiarization or report? How many people even know that Nigeria has a data policy? Have our data policies. I think that there is a lot of efforts placed on the fact that the laws, they are there, but how do you roll it out? Creating the law is one thing, but how do you police? How do you put together the structures that allow for the other things around it, the processes around it to occur that can then lead to strengthening the legal structures around data infringement? It is not an easy conversation. It's not a conversation that we are going to solve today, which is why at this time a lot of people, the responsibility to secure your data is on the individual or the company that has that information or that data. If you do not want an information out there in the public, put it in social media. Is that simple? It's your responsibility. Figure it out. You get my point. If you do not want your book or something that you wrote in private to be plagiarized, don't put it out there. So a lot of that responsibility falls back to you. But the truth is, as everything is strengthened with time, the more people are aware of the fact that these policies exist, the more structures from a policing point of view is put in place to actually monitor and then address scenarios where this come up, the better it will be. The truth is, we don't have the right structures for policing as a nation, and that is why it's very difficult. So I don't have a way to answer this. I would say that the responsibility at this time remains with the individual who owns that data, and they should be conscious of how they put the information out there to ensure that it's not misused or plagiarized. That's the way I would respond to that. So back to you, Dara.
Thanks, Ife.
So again, I think the key point here is that look, we're in an evolution, and sometimes as a consumer, so I love consumers. I'm a consumer. It means that I'm very lazy, right? I expect everything to be nicely laid out for me so that I'm making minimal decision and the effort is low. But I think that as data nerds, as I like calling ourselves, we need to go past the consumer behavior and dig deeper. An average consumer just sees intelligence. As data nerds, we go through the process of data, mining it into information, and then making it into intelligence. Because of that, we go through a more rigorous process that allows us to understand, for instance, this is where I can go and complain to meet that. This is the process of complaining to meet that. Maybe it's a 12-step process or 24-step process. That's why you've seen the birth of people like, what's the name of that company that does like data around like government spending, budgets. Good. If you guys understand the process that budgets goes through to get that information from the states, right? But they take it, they break it down, they compact it, and they give it to you. And then you as a consumer just see it and say, Ogun State, they are spending more money than XYZ, right? But you have to go through that research. It's like a lot of times people talk about politics. And I'll give you some reference. Do you know that Lagos State's budget, in fact, let me flip it around. New York Fire Department in America, the ones that were charged, that led the charge with 9/11, New York State's fire department, just the firefighters, the ones that climb ladder, spray water, their budget is bigger than Lagos State's budget. So let's think about it. Lagos, probably Nigeria is what, 180 million based off
200 if we use our
200. So Lagos is what? 10 million, 15 million? Right.
I'll check, but it's over like 20. So it's going
okay.
towards 20.
Okay, so let's say it's 20 million. The budget that's meant to serve 20 million people, right? They use it to put out fires in America. So when you have, because I've been able to go through, take different data points, you then realize why the government in Nigeria, for instance, has to always borrow money, because a fire department cannot have more money than the entire state, which is the economic capital of the country.
Yeah.
Right? So it's easy as a consumer to sit there and say, government is not doing this, government is not doing that. But when you go through and unpack it from being a consumer, being more of a data nerd, looking at the data points together, connecting that information, you now understand why every time government is borrowing. And government will have these budgets, but does not have the money to fund the budget. The budget is their aspiration. The money is a different issue. Then you see taxes coming. So typically, I hear it all the time. They're like, they just came up with this new tax. But if you read the budget, you understand what they are trying to do. And then you always know that they're never going to have enough money. So naturally, the taxes will come in. So it's a cycle. Nigerians are still surprised by it because we don't go through the data, we don't unpack it. We just look at it as a consumer, and we're like, this country, Nawao, Sanwo-Olu, Buhari, So again, we need to be like super inquisitive. I'm going to give you one more example that I know this one affects everybody. So people love this one. Do you know that in 2018? Okay, so let's take a step back. You remember, like last month, a certain bank started charging COT miraculously overnight. A lot of people were unhappy about it, right? A bank that will not be named, right? And then it reminded me, you see all those charges. There are some of those charges that are actually not, that as individuals we shouldn't pay. But again, as consumers, we don't know this. We just, anything the bank tells us, you just click yes, 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 yes. We sign up, we do everything. Now, CBN has this consumer protection department. What do? Their job is actually to make sure that consumers are treated fairly, and we are not charged for things we're not meant to be charged. But I know none of you till now probably know that CBN has this consumer protection, department. Now, do you know that in 2018, in the first half of 2018, that consumer department that none of you know about helped customers, or rather forced the banks to refund 6.8 billion naira. 6.8 billion naira in excess charges. Excess charges. Excess. So not even the charges you are meant to pay, the excess ones that the bank charge you that you are not meant to pay. In 6 months, in the first half of 2018, they refunded 6.8 billion naira. Now the question is, why didn't they return money to your account? It's because you didn't complain. Why didn't you complain? Because you don't know you can complain, and you don't know the process for you to complain, right? I know this because I've gone through that process. I know there's a CBN policy. I know it takes time. And this is just, again, coming back to that market knowledge of understanding. So we have the benefit of being in kind of that fintech space. And we tend to understand and unpack how the banks, how technology works. But just so that you know, as a consumer, if you're ever taking a loan, some of these charges, your bank has probably charged you something that you shouldn't have. There's a CBN department that you can go to and complain. So, but again, it's just to show you that there's so much out there that we don't know, and we've just not dug in the right place. How many of you go and read regulations? Probably you guys don't know. If you read any of the CBN regulations, this would have stood out to you, and you would have seen that, hey, CBN has a department, etc. But again, there's a lot of information. You can't be a master at everything. And this is why it's also important, again, coming back to one of my initial comments, of having a community. Just like the way Google has all the different phones and the apps that it pays, it's not just one person doing it, it's literally a community of people doing it. And that way you guys get to share information faster and be aware of more things faster. So just rounding off the questions, Dipo, yeah, so I think we've touched on Dipo's question around intelligence and data gathering. And then Damola had that other question around data gathering, insights, and long-term vision. So he said, if you are gathering data for kind of a long-term play, how do you factor in policy changes? I think that over time, so there are a couple of frameworks. Ify had mentioned, Ify come from the consulting kind of a market intelligence background. And one thing I love about consultants is there are frameworks for everything, right? If it's how do I have a baby that doesn't complain, there's a framework for it. How do I grow my business from 1 naira to 50 naira, there's a framework for it. Now, a lot of these frameworks, in my opinion, for me, frameworks are like spider sense. Yeah, you guys have watched Spider-Man. So he has a spider sense. He knows he's in danger. He doesn't know what that danger is. He's probably not even seen it. Mm-hmm. The frameworks are a bit like your spidey sense. It allows you to understand what you don't know, or rather, it allows you to know what you don't know. There's one of these frameworks called, I think is Pastel, or I've forgotten the actual. Pastel. Yeah, Pastel. And I'm about to show my old age. What does P stand for? Is it political? So it's PESTEL. I think it's political, economical, social. Is it tech? No, it can't be tech.
No, it's not tech.
No, I'm going to Google it just so I don't embarrass myself.
So, economical, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so people are helping me out. Good. Okay, so everybody knows the framework. Good. So Yeah. Okay. So I've googled it now, so I can pretend to be an expert now. Yeah. So there's political.
Technology is T actually.
Yeah. Okay. So there's political, economic, social, technology, environment, legal. Now, typically, when we are putting this kind of recommendations forward, we actually adopt a number of these different frameworks. Pastel is one. You have your Porter's 5 forces. You have your marketing units. Over time, you get to know a number of these frameworks. And these frameworks, for me, again, Spidey sense, and it's also like, you know, Batman has this tool belt where you just, everything he wants is in there. Anything he's looking for, Ribena, Gala, Boomerang, he just has it. You have to create this kind of tool belt of frameworks that allow you to see a problem and quickly diagnose a problem, right? So when we are looking at strategy, we're looking at, you know, external forces that we can't control, we will take something like Pastel's framework and drop it into our recommendation. And we will say, what does the political landscape look like? If your plan is longer than 4 years, you have to take into account a national or countrywide election, right? You also have to take into account a state election, right? Thanks, Ify, for dropping the link. A state election, right? Economic. So you have to look at, hey, have there been any bold claims by the country? Do they have this, you know, there's always this vision 2020, vision 2030. Let's look at what the country claims it wants to do, and let's look at how far they are into those things. That also allows you to try and predict the future in what they might do. Now, it's natural for them to change, particularly if the political bit changes. But again, you are trying to predict. And the prediction typically is not just, this is the one thing they're going to do. You're like, these are the 5 things that might happen. The probability is that these top 3 are really the things you need to worry about. And you know, it's actually just this one out of the 3 that really affects you, but it's just nice for you to know that these are all the different options. And that's kind of, you know, looking at frameworks, contextualizing it, bringing the fact that you're going to have state elections, we have national elections, we have all these things, you contextualize it so that the recommendations and the people reading the recommendations have a 360 view of what they're recommending, and they can see that you've thought through all the different aspects on their behalf. That allows people to trust the reports that you're bringing out, and based on that intelligence that you've drawn out, for them to make a decision. One thing I haven't talked about, by the way, is the fact that it's always important when you do your research, when you do your reports, to show your methodology and explain assumptions. If I find one fault in your reports or your data, one fault, I can just distrust everything that you've done.
Yeah.
Right. Once someone does not trust the data coming from you, you're gone. You're done. It's going to take you literally like 5 times the effort to convince that person that what you're putting in front of them is correct. So it's super important that they might not agree with your output, but at least if they can see the assumptions that drove you to those to that output or recommendation, then they typically will be aligned to, you know, what you said. So if you have some comments and feedback.
Yes. So predicting the future. I mean, there are like Dara said. Dara, thank you for that. Frameworks help a lot. But what I would say is that there are 2 things to identify whenever you are looking at future occurrence. How do I game out what the future could potentially look like? How do I plan that out based off of, you know, data I've collected in the present? The first thing I'll point out is that anything you are doing in a plan is a wish, is a hope. It's what you expect to happen, but it's not a fact. So trying to be 100% accurate, first off, not gonna happen. So let's accept that. There's no way it's going to be 100% accurate. That's one. Secondly is that, yes, we can guesstimate what could potentially happen by looking at since it's policy that you spoke to specifically, what the political environment looks like, how volatile is it, right? So take, for example, the way you would analyze a long-term plan let's say in the US, is very different from how you analyze it here in Nigeria, because of the difference in the political stability, in the sense that for a new government to come into play and eradicate what existed before is so much more difficult in the US than it is in a country like Nigeria. That's an example. So when you start to game out what the future could potentially look like, if there is a lot of political or policy dependency, right, you have to take that into consideration. So that is, for example, information that you are putting in, you're part of the information you gather when you're doing your intelligence report or your planning activity. So it doesn't mean that is exactly what will happen, but it's part of what Dara has mentioned about your assumptions. The fact that the likelihood of change in policy because of change in government becomes a lot more possible, is like 70% in Nigeria compared to an environment like the US that maybe you can estimate that it is like 30% or less. The fact is continuity matters to them more than it matters to us here at the stage of our stage of our growth as a nation. So the fact remains that, when you want to do a lot of long-term planning, the SWOT to PESTEL, assessment lets you look at what are the factors you can control and say, okay, the ones that I can control, I have to base a lot of my planning on things I can control. And then the risk factors, the risk is now around the things I cannot control, which in an environment like Nigeria, policy and political changes is always going to be one of them. I think that this is something that doesn't happen overnight. It comes from practice. It comes from having done this multiple times. Because take, for example, people who have been there for a length of years, and keep in mind that there is policy from a broad sense of it, like, oh, Nigeria, policy, Nigeria, and then there's policy at the sectoral or industry level. So I'll give you an example. Policy changes around social matters is a lot more fickle than it is around, let's say, aviation. Why? Because aviation or trade have influence from international bodies as against policies that are at the social level. So there is a lot of experience that you bring to the table when you are doing an assessment like that or planning like that. It's based off of your understanding of the industry and the players and the stakeholders in the industry. Nigeria is not going to wake up one day and say all of a sudden, we are going to start charging an extra, I don't know, we are going to stop, flights from flying over our airspace. It's not going to happen, right? As against, Nigeria government can come in and say, we are going to stop everything social. We are never going to do any social program in this country again. It's possible. It's in your rights to do that. There is a lot of context around, what that industry looks like. It's not just policy at the high level, oh, Nigeria as a whole, when it comes to policies on stable. There's the deeper understanding that you start to go at the sectoral level that helps you understand the influence of policy on your planning. So I would say that frameworks help. Deeper understanding of the sector that your business is in, that helps you understand how far ahead you should plan, matters. The political cycles and the trend also matters. Historical trend, what has happened before, helps you to assign certain risk levels to the occurrences of certain behaviors. So disruption of an already existing plan that is ongoing just because there's a change in government is a lot more likely because it has happened 2-3 times before. So a change in minister may halt a project. Let's say, for example, I'm planning my business around the fact that, remember Erythropolis. I'm planning my business around the fact that the Nigerian government wants to institute Erythropolis. There's this blah, 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 blah. When there is a change, this is not even a change in government. When there's a change in minister, direction may change. that is something that you know because of trend. It has happened before, not because the policy or the government plan changed. The federal government did not change its plan, but the minister's direction changed. So there's a lot of factors you come into, that comes into play. Historical trends help you ascertain the risk level to apply to each potential assumption that you put forward, and your experience in the sector helps you understand how certain behaviors or certain stakeholders position comes into play when you are assessing the impact, the potential direction a country may go, or a policy may go, a plan may go. So I would say that a lot of this is, even when you're using the framework, comes from your experience or the experience of other members of your team and the historical trends. So it's not something that that you can teach per se. It's something that is driven by case. So when you are doing a master's program or an MBA, a lot of what you learn is based off of cases that they put forward to you that helps you trigger your way of thinking. And it's less about, okay, this and this and this will always happen. No, it doesn't work like that. It always comes from a case scenario. Oh, this has happened before, so the likelihood that this. So I hope that kind of answers the question around that. I did see the other question that came from Temitayo, I believe, was, are there organizational standards for gathering intelligence, or is this subject to an individual's technical strength? Dara, I'll leave you to answer this because you have around collection of this information in an organizational structure that is a lot more structured than what I tend to do. Me, I'm more individual driven. You have an organization when it comes to intelligence gathering. Do you mind sharing on that?
Sure. So I think if you want to compare apples to apples, so when you look at a company in the UK or the US, where the government is an avid how do I put it, enabler of information. They understand that if everyone has information and data, they can do what the government cannot achieve. Innovation can happen, and there's a very close and tight linkages between the government and academia and the how do I put it, and the businesses in the country. So it's easy to work in somewhere like IBM and have so much data because we even provide the kind of data that allows lawmakers to make decisions, right? But when you step it down to somewhere like Nigeria, where the government is not playing the same role as the government in the UK or the US, where there's no linkage between the schools, research, the companies, or the private sector, yeah, then you are not, it's not apples to apples anymore. It's kind of like apples to a goofy seed, right? It's just not the same. But, and so when I can go to one database and see all the information, then I can focus on being a data scientist or data engineer, right? I can focus on that and let's say, okay, you know what? Let me bring all those buzzwords, machine learning, deep learning, or all the learning, let's do it. But if you are a AI specialist, machine learning specialist, data scientist, or you don't have the infrastructure to support you, it's like being an astronaut without a spaceship.
Yep.
At best, like just a pilot, right? But it's like that. So in more developed countries, you see people focusing on their own personal technical capability, whereas when you are not in a super developed economy that has the structures, then what you need to do is focus on your own personal ability to be able to get the data, transform it to information and intelligence that can allow people to make decisions. Now, on an organizational level, I think that organizations can have structures to one, understand their data, well, collect their data. So you must have seen those diagrams where you data collection first, then it's really about data storage, then it's really about data manipulation, and then you have whatever outputs that you require. As a country, we're not even data driven. And let's if you call a spade, we're not. So it's hard for organizations in Nigeria to adopt that kind of standard when, as a people, we are just not doing it, right? Across every facet of our lives. Education, we're not. The workplace, we're not. It's just one of those things. So in terms of organizational gathering of intelligence, what happens now is that you have companies, even like VBG, making a lot of intentional steps to be part of that data gathering flow and to be an evolution to the point where we to become active contributors to data and information that people can access. But it's an evolution, right? And it's something that has to be super intentional. I think we've been discussing this, well, as far back as I've been at VGG, right? And we've had the privilege of working with, some organizations, MBS, NESG as well. And I think NESG is open to most people, if I'm correct, or even everybody to come in and be a volunteer, right? To be able to work on policies and help guide policies and even contribute to data and access some data as well. So just for anybody here, there is NESG, which is the National Economic Social Group.
Summit.
Thank you. Summit Group, who provide, again, policy, they are policy enablers to shape Nigeria. So you have some efforts being taken to kind of institutionalize or kick off organizational gathering of intelligence and information to help people. But on the private sector, it's kind of each to their own at the moment. A lot of people are struggling with getting that data, getting the right storage. We as tech companies, we're a bit more agile than an FMCG, but it's something that will happen over time, right? But till then, again, I think someone mentioned a lot of the data sets come from the US or UK, and it's just because those countries are kind of miles ahead of us in terms of this data journey. We are just literally starting off. When I think about it, again, without revealing my age, a couple of years ago, we didn't even have mobile phones in Nigeria. I still remember my landline number that we had in our house in Ikeja, right? And in literally a span of maybe 3-4 years, there was, I came back and everybody had, a phone. So I think that we'll catch up, but organizations are a lot more slower than individuals. So it's kind of a chicken and egg, scenario there. But I hope that kind of touches around some of the questions that Tim Topper asked around, but kind of like organization gathering intelligence. Again, if you are in an organization that isn't part of that journey yet, I would suggest finding a community. I think this is the 3rd or 4th time I've talked about finding a community. And I think it's important because just like Google, we have to harness the power of everybody else who is interested or who can contribute to this to be able to get enough data and have better access to data so that you can make reports and outputs that can actually influence people to make better decisions. So hopefully that kind of just gives more context to where we are in terms of organization, gathering intelligence, and then if anybody has any comments, I would like to get some feedback. I I think everybody has been contributing, but I would like to get some, more interaction from everybody else. So actually, is Ify still on? Have I lost Ify?
Okay, hi, I'm back. Kind of dropped off for a bit. My laptop died out. But yeah, thanks, Dara, for that. I think to summarize for me, is that are there high-level standards or frameworks around, data and data analysis and data gathering and how it goes from data creation to intelligence? Yes, there are high-level frameworks. Are these frameworks, being applied in totality today within our current environment? No, not entirely, because we are still struggling with putting together the structures for, data collection. And to be clear, data collection, data gathering is a very, very expensive venture today. The required technology to ensure that this is an effective or efficient process is typically very, very expensive today. It's very difficult for you to find successful data companies in Nigeria today, unless they are funded by, social causes. Very, very hard to go through, process of data collection. That means that today a lot of the work is being done by individuals, technical strengths. And what for example, we at BGD is trying to create with this network is to get more people a lot more aware of how market intelligence and data gathering and all this happens. The more people you train, the more people you can actually create a network of people who are deliberately contributing data to the public based off of their interactions with their immediate environment, data across multiple spheres. How do we now build out a network of primary data collection, primary data collectors, that when we aggregate this data together, we start to analyze this data to generate information and insights. And then from that information, we can create that, those information, those insights, mix and match them, manipulate them as required to drive intelligence for decision making. It's a long journey, but the journey starts from, first of all, creating that community of data contributors. We've realized that you cannot get data by being behind a laptop. It is not possible. You need people who are observing and collecting data around their environment in real time, creating structures and optimizing structures for data collection. The truth is, the individual's technical strength takes time to build, and it's experience that actually fine-tunes this to where it needs to be. So through this exercise, the more we train people around what that data collection, how to structure research to collect primary data, how to engage in secondary data collection. Trust me, even within primary data collection, there are several means. A survey is not the only way. Yeah, we've talked about technology, push-pull scenario where people are self-reporting, or a system is pulling that data, like in the Google scenario. There's also, covert intelligence, which is what covert data collection, which is what a lot of, the intelligence agencies across the world. Every country has its intelligence agency, including Nigeria. The covert intelligence collection. There's also that. How do you get information from an organization that is not public? Dara spoke about banks. Most of the banks are public. They are on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. But you have hundreds, thousands of companies in Nigeria that are not public. So how do you get information around what's happening around, data around what's happening in those organizations? How do you then use that information to generate and try and use that data to generate information, because you can connect what's happening in one company to another company to another company, and then you now have information around maybe there are people in that industry, or activities in that industry. How do you then use that for intelligence? So a lot of things are happening, and the structures, we are just laying that in. I would say that today I would focus less on the organizational standards for gathering intelligence, and we are building more on individual technical strengths, because the standards can evolve. You can evolve standards very easily. Getting it right involves, continuous iteration. So standards, I won't fixate on the standards. I'll say understand the different formats in which you can collect data, understand the different types of data, whether it's primary or secondary, understand the different methodologies for exploring the collection of that data, understand the different ways to store that data, understand different ways to manipulate and analyze through statistical and non-statistical analysis, and then how that evolves into intelligence. If we spend more time understanding and exploring that, we will move further than trying to limit ourselves to existing standards in countries where they are a lot more data aware, they are a lot more data rich than we are today. In short, we have data. We are data poor because we do not create that data, and that's a big problem that we are facing today. So that will be what I'll add to that. I know we are over our time by 18 minutes. I don't know, Derek, if you have any other thing to add before Mario comes to just pretty much round up the session.
No, I think I'm good. I think for me is to say thank you guys for the questions and the feedback. I think that this has actually been like super interactive. I love the energy. I love the questions that people are asking. And I think, good work, good job to Mario and the team. I've seen the kind of what the roadmap looks like in terms of the different topics and things like that. So I think well done to everybody who's been involved in the community. I enjoyed today's session thoroughly. If you guys always have additional questions, feel free to add myself on LinkedIn and ask any questions that you want. So thank you guys for having me, and it was a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, Dara. This was a very amazing session. Thank you so much, Ify. Thank you for the awesome job. In fact, let me allow these guys express themselves. I know they are so excited right now. Thank you. So you guys, you can unmute and say thank you to Ify and Dara for the amazing session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ify and Dara. I'm so grateful. Like, I've learned so much in this session. It's a 2-hour session than a week self-study session. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ify and Dara. A lot of things which I knew theoretically, you guys have actually made me see how to use them practically, and particularly how to read reading policies and to become more aware of what's happening in my country, because there's so much wealth of wisdom out there which I'm not using.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you to Ify and Dara. Actually, it's been an eye-opener all this while, and all through the section, I was actually trying to draw a line in my mind, trying to grasp at every point in time. So everything was just so captivating, and I really appreciate. So I look forward to learning more and catching up more. So I really appreciate. Thanks.
Thank you, Ify and Dara. The session was really insightful. Earlier to this, I had minute knowledge on this information, but now this is a real eye opener. I'm really grateful for this session. Thanks.
Okay, I think we still have someone's hand up. Koka, do you have a question or a comment or something? Okay, I can see Chinyeri's hand up. Okay, Chinyeri. You can unmute yourself and speak.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ify and Dara. Thank you for the insightful question. Thank you. It's always good to hear from someone who has so much experience and so much that does industry and knows what's up. So thank you guys. We want to hear from you again. We love to hear from you again. More and more. Thank you.
You're welcome. Guys, thank you for joining in. One thing I'll say is there is so much to learn from really just pushing yourself. Self-learning, you cannot eliminate that. A lot of the experience that we have doesn't just come from working within certain organizations. It also comes from just pushing yourself and going out there and learning about these things as well. So combining this structure that we created to combine self-learning with mentorship. That's why we don't come and do a slide and present and say, this is data, this is what information is, because there is so much, those parts you can do it on your own. But what you really need is someone to come and, practicalize it for you, bring it down to, the foundations. What really does this mean in real life, in real context, scenarios? So, guys, you guys keep pushing yourselves. We are trying to build a network of, data geeks, like, Dara likes to say, people who are data enthusiasts, people who are contributing data into the general public as well, contributing data back to the community, creating that community that actually is helping us move away from a data poor country into a data rich country. So well done, guys. Keep pushing yourselves, and we are available for more questions if you have them. Thanks for joining in.
Okay, guys. So we'll try to make this recording available on the group. So when we have the record sent to us via mail, I'll make the link available on the group, so you can always listen and listen over and over again. Thank you so much for joining in. Thank you once again, Ify and Dara. We look forward to having more sessions with you. Yeah. Thank you so much. All right, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
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 Bye.